The independent state of Croatia was a puppet state established by Germany and Italy after the invasion and dismemberment of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia in April 1941. Following its creation, it immediately began forming its own military, including an air force. While it inherited some Yugoslav aircraft, it lacked modern and sufficient equipment, particularly in terms of fighter aircraft. In 1942, the acquisition of the Italian Fiat G50 bis somewhat alleviated the situation to a minimal extent. Similarly, the Maran Saunier MS-406, a French fighter plane, and the Messerschmitt Me-109, a German aircraft, were also acquired, but in limited numbers and often arriving too late to significantly impact the Air Force's capabilities. Croatia struggled with many logistical challenges, including shortages of fuel, which severely limited the operational effectiveness of its air force. These limitations meant that its air force was often unable to effectively defend Croatian airspace or provide significant support to Axis operations in the region. Overall, this air force remained relatively small and under-equipped throughout the war. Following the conclusion of the First World War, Europe witnessed the emergence of several new nations. Among them was the establishment of the short-lived Kingdom of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs, which upon merger with Serbia formed the new Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. This new state was, at least in theory, based on the principle of equality of these three nationalities. In reality, this kingdom was a politically and ethnically divided country. During the 1920s, there were huge political disagreements between the major parties which brought about questions regarding the continued existence of the kingdom. This division was especially noted between Serbian and Croatian politicians, which ultimately culminated in the assassination of several Croatian Peasant Party members by a Serbian politician in 1928. In January 1929, King Alexander Karađorđević, in an attempt to avoid the incoming political crisis, led the country into a dictatorship by abolishing parliament and even changing the name of the country to the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. This did not resolve any of the underlying problems, as inter-ethnic tensions persisted. During the early 1930s, the Croatian Ustaše ultranationalist revolutionary organizations began to appear in Yugoslavia. Their main aim was the liberation of the Croatian people from Yugoslavia by all means necessary, even by force. While their influence was minimal at best, their movement gained traction after the Axis attack on Yugoslavia in April 1941. With the collapse of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, Croatia, with German and Italian aid, was finally able to declare independence on the 10th of April, 1941. Following the collapse of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, the newly created independent state of Croatia began forming its military forces. The Air Force was created on the 19th of April, 1941. Immediately, work began on creating an adequate structural organization, acquiring manpower, and procuring equipment. Initially, plans for arming this air force were ambitious and included acquiring the newest German aircraft design. The Germans, on the other hand, decided to ignore this request as these planes were needed for the upcoming invasion of the Soviet Union. They also did not fully trust the Croatians either. As a compromise, the Croatian Air Force was to be equipped with the stockpiles of captured Yugoslavian aircraft. The Germans cheated their ally by giving them only those aircraft that were mostly obsolete, while transferring the better surviving aircraft to their other allies instead. Essentially, it would take a few years until the Croatians were able to acquire more modern aircraft, but even then, it was in limited numbers. By 1942, the Croatian Air Force was mainly preoccupied with combat, patrol, and resupply missions. However, the existing pool of obsolete aircraft was not enough for the job. As the Germans were not willing to help, Croatian officials turned to Italy. After some negotiation, they managed to acquire 9 Fiat G50 bis fighters and one two-seater version. The Fiat G50 bis was the first Italian all-metal fighter, and between 1938 and 1943, less than 800 of these aircraft were built. While not a bad design, it quickly became obsolete in contrast to the Allied fighters. A group of 6 Croatian pilots were sent to the Fiat company in Torino for training in January of 1942. The entire acquisition process took some time, with the last aircraft reaching Croatia in June of 1942. These were stationed on an airfield near the capital of Zagreb, and due to the poor condition of the airfield, 2 were lightly damaged during landing. Once in service, these received new registration numbers ranging from 2501 to 2509. The Fiat fighters rarely saw action, and after April of 1943, most were pulled back to Zagreb, where they were attached to the 1st Squadron. When Italy capitulated to the Allies, all warring parties in Yugoslavia rushed in to take over the abandoned Italian weaponry, including aircraft. This way, Croatia managed to capture at least 6 more fighters. By 1944, the Allies had achieved almost complete air supremacy over southeastern Europe. Thus, flying the slower Fiat G50s became quite dangerous. In April of 1944, several Croatian aircraft, including 2 Fiat G50s, were destroyed in an Allied bombing run. Due to their obsolescence, these fighters could do little against Allied bombers. In addition, the chronic lack of fuel led to a reduction in combat flights. On the 2nd of September 1944, one pilot with his Fiat G50 defected to the partisans. As this aircraft was fully operational, the partisans gave it a paint job and put it in service. An interesting fact about this aircraft is that it still exists today and is the only surviving example of a G50 in the world. Shortly after this, another pilot defected to the Allies in Italy. When the partisans liberated Zagreb in May 1945, 9 aircraft in various conditions would be captured. Some would be put to use after the war, but all would be removed from service by 1946. Another fighter that was operated by the Croatian Air Force was the Moran Saunier MS-406. This was a French fighter whose development began in the mid-1930s. By the time of the French defeat in 1940, more than 1,000 aircraft of this type were built, and many of these were captured by the Germans. The frequent and desperate Croatian pleas for more figures were finally answered by the Germans in the form of a contingent of between 36 to 46 French fighters. These arrived in the period between late 1943 and early 1944. But the precise dates or numbers are somewhat unclear in the sources. The MS-406 may have been a relatively good design when the war broke out, but by 1944, it was hopelessly outdated. As nothing else was available, the Croatians had to make do with them. The training of the pilots was initiated in late 1943, and the first operational unit was formed by mid-February 1944. In March of 1944, the Croatian Air Force Legion arrived at Zagreb. This unit was formed back in 1941 and was in direct control of the Germans. Its pilots participated under German command on the Eastern Front and were quite experienced. The Germans demanded that at least 2 MS-406s be given to this unit to be used as training aircraft. The situation in the air and the ground significantly worsened for Croatians at the start of 1944. The Allies began bombing operations in occupied Yugoslavia, hitting many military installations including ammunition depots, fuel production facilities, and airfields. In early April of 1944, the Croatian 5th Air Base was also bombed, and some 11 aircraft were destroyed while a further 20 were damaged. One MS-406 was destroyed when an Allied bomb landed next to it, and several days later, another one was destroyed the same way. As of September 15, 1944, there were a total of 19 aircraft of this type available, although only 7 were fully operational at that time. In the same month, the partisans successfully seized control of a Croatian airfield near Banja Luka. Upon spotting the advancing partisans, the pilots and defense forces stationed at the airfield hastily fled the area. Between 11 to 30 fully intact aircraft, including 3 MS-406s, were captured. The partisans immediately put these into action, but one was damaged in an accident and was written off. In late 1944, the few surviving MS-406s were used in desperate attempts to stop the partisan forces that were liberating Yugoslavia. By this point, the Croatian Air Force could do little to stop them given the chronic lack of fuel. Unfortunately, precise information about the fate of many Croatian aircraft in the last few months of the war was not well recorded. While the partisans managed to capture a few MS-406s, their use was limited at best and, unfortunately, none of them are known to have survived the war. The German Me-109 was one of the best fighters in the first few years of the war. Yugoslavia was one of the first countries that managed to acquire some Me-109s from Germany. The Germans later captured a number of them after the invasion of 1941. The Croatians cast their eyes upon these, expecting that the German ally would surely supply some of them, as they hoped to form a fighter group equipped with 22 such aircraft. Unfortunately for them, the Germans decided to keep the Yugoslavian fighters for themselves instead. Despite this, some of the Croatian pilots still got the chance to fly on them. While receiving no major supply of equipment from their ally, the Croatians still wanted to have a good relationship with the Germans. When the massive invasion of the Soviet Union was launched, while Croatia did not directly participate in this attack, its government called for volunteers to join the German army. The Croatian Air Force contributed as well. While it lacked equipment, it did not have shortages of personnel willing to go and fight the Soviets. For this purpose, the 4th Air Force Regiment was formed, consisting of the 4th Air Force Fighter Group and the 5th Air Force Bomber Group. Once assembled, the fighter group was transported to Germany, where their training commenced on the 19th of July, 1941. The Croatian pilots arrived in the east on the 6th of October, 1941, and on the 2nd of November, the first air victory was achieved. During nearly a year spent on this front, the Croatian pilots managed to achieve great success. If the sources are to be believed, they achieved 164 confirmed air victories during over 3,300 flights. The best fighter ace of this unit was Svieten Galic, credited with 24 air victories, plus 7 more that were not confirmed. The unit was not without casualties, as 6 pilots were lost. After a few months spent resting, they returned to the Soviet Union in February 1943, and they were stationed in Crimea, seeing heavy action. While they continued bringing down many Soviet pilots, the rapid deterioration on the front lines caused some of these pilots to second-guess their place in the war. In May and June, at least 3 pilots defected to the Soviet Union. Fearing that more would follow, the Germans prohibited any further flights by Croatian pilots. The unit commander was temporarily removed from this post, but reinstated later in September 1943. In late October, more combat flight patrols with new pilots were initiated. The 4th group had only 8 fully operational aircraft at this point. In September 1944, 2 more pilots defected to the Soviet side, forcing the Germans to once again forbid the remaining Croatian pilots from flying. In November, the unit was disbanded and its personnel received infantry training. In early 1945, these soldiers saw action as standard infantry in Poland. After March 1945, those who survived were sent back to Croatia. By that time, they managed to achieve an impressive 300 air victories. It was not until early 1945 that the first Me-109s began to arrive in Croatia, destined for the 4th Fighter Group. While nominally part of the Croatian Air Force, the 4th Fighter Group was actually under the direct control of the Germans. They were to receive 15 to 30 fighters, but during transit, some of them were lost. It is believed that the last aircraft reached Croatia in January 1945. The following month, these were used to attack some partisan-held airfields, but a general lack of supplies, especially fuel, limited the combat use of Croatian aircraft. By 1945, defections from the Croatian forces became a common occurrence, and they were having a hard time keeping the army intact. The Air Force was not an exception to this, as its pilots often managed to escape either to the Allies in Italy or the Yugoslav partisans. During April, at least 4 pilots defected. On the 23rd of April 1945, while on patrol, 2 Me-109s spotted 2 Allied P-51s. The Me-109 pilots managed to fly at a close range and opened fire. After a brief skirmish, they managed to shoot 1 enemy down. 2 more P-51s intercepted them, but the Me-109s managed to escape. The few remaining Me-109s were used in the last days of the war, defending the Axis positions on the Sirmian front in the eastern part of Croatia. During this time, the Me-109s participated in a few skirmishes with the partisan-operated Yak fighters, but Croatian pilots generally avoided direct fights as they were severely outnumbered. In the last days of the war, many of the Me-109s escaped to Austria or were left abandoned, later to be put to use by the advancing partisans. This wraps up our look at the fighter aircraft of the independent state of Croatia. We'd love to hear your thoughts on their brief but notable deployment, so feel free to share your opinions in the comments below. If you enjoyed this content and want more, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Also, be sure to visit our website, plane-encyclopedia.com, for an extensive range of articles on aviation history and aircraft. Thank you for watching.